Welcome y bienvenidos to another episode of Love Learning You. I'm your hostess, Justine Gonzalez, and we're going to hop right in with my guest today, Dr. Shawnta Barnes. She will be introducing herself to us through some questions that we're going to dive right into called cultural connectors. Now, if you've been here for a while, you know that I love to talk about culture, communication, and well-being on this channel. And I do also have a personal channel. So those will all be linked below. So whenever you're here, any resources that have to do with our guest, any free things, upcoming things, just resources we want to share with you, other pages, and those will always be linked below. So whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or you're right here on YouTube, that is where they will always be. So look there. Make sure you hit subscribe if this is content that you like to have in your feed. Okay, thank you again for being here on the journey. The first cultural connector question to get to know our guest, outside of just all the amazing professional credentials and experiences she has, are we're going to time travel. And I'm going to get my beverage ready, actually. So I love to have drinks to sip on my podcast, and it is morning time in the Chicago area. So I'm going to share about what I'm sipping while you answer the questions, because food is such a big part of us culturally, all of us as humans, whether we realize it or not. And culture is really our beliefs, our norms, values, symbols, things that are important to us, etc. But those things drive a lot of our decisions around where we travel, what we eat, what we listen to with music choices, etc. So I'm making a mocktail in the morning, and this is homemade hibiscus juice. And then I'm going to use a bubbly, which is carbonated water, and it's coconut pineapple. So, do you have any, real quick, before we jump to the real question and travel back in time to little Shawnta's favorite meal? Do you have any great quick mocktails like this that you want to share or that you love to sip on throughout your workday? I've just been big on hydration lately.
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I really love ginger ale. So if I'm going to make my like fizzy thing, it's typically ginger ale. And I grow mint. So I always am trying to throw mint in something. So it's normally ginger, some type of maybe lemonade that I'm going to make or fresh juice I'm going to make. And that's what I kind of put together for a mocktail. But I like to change it up a little bit.
Okay. Well, sorry, I got a little distracted because I was like, oh, I'm gonna overflow. But that was you had shared that with me recently, so much so that some of your family members, your sons, are even picky about the types of mint that you grow. Is that accurate? You're an avid gardener.
Yes. Yes, at our first house that we lived in for quite some time, our garden was pretty established. So our current house, we lived in our current house for 5 years. So we're still establishing, putting up more beds every single year. But our first house, we had three different types of mint. We had pineapple mint, chocolate mint, and then we did peppermint. At our current house, we just have your regular, peppermint. And so this year, we will be adding a second peppermint bed. For those of you that don't know about mint, mint spreads. There's a term that's not coming to my mind, but it spreads via its roots. So you have to have mint in a container. If you do not, mint will literally, and I mean literally, take over your entire yard. So I have to buy another container. So it wasn't as easy as my boys like, we can just put mint over here because some of my containers aren't as secure. They may be like a box on the ground where you have the four sides, but there's no bottom. I need to
Okay.
put my mint in something that has a bottom because mint can escape and duplicate itself. So it's super, super important to keeping. Now the bigger question is, what type of mint are we going to add? That will be a whole other drama, which I'm not prepared for yet. So stay tuned to find out what actual other mint we choose this time.
Well, I've already learned so much. You know, one of our former colleagues one time said about Shantae, she's like a computer of information. But I learned so much just from having conversations with you, and now I have to look up chocolate mint. What? There's chocolate mint I can grow.
Yeah, and
I've just been cooking
if you
forever.
look at the stems of it, the stems are kind of like a darker brown. And it has this flavor that really complements when you put it with chocolate. Because some mint, and I tell people this, every mint does not belong in your hot chocolate because it's going to taste like you mixed in some toothpaste. So you need to make sure you have the right type of mint going in if you're going to mix it with chocolate, or it's going to taste really nasty.
Well, that was super informative. And also, I'm now excited to go down that rabbit trail myself. And I'll be sure not put it in a container in my yard because I don't need my whole yard to be mint. Um, so on that same note, though, let's time travel with these cultural connector questions. This first one I love to utilize with groups that I work with in person as well. And it's always fascinating the information that comes out because sometimes we think, well, that's a silly question. Or if you're an educator, sometimes you think, well, I don't, what information will that give me from my students? Will that take us off track? No, there's a lot of rich information that if you think about the question you're asking, what are the things underneath it that drive those pieces of who we are? So we're going to time travel. And if you're taking all of us, and again, we have listeners and have had exposure of our podcast in around 40 countries around the world. Only about 50% of our subscribers and listeners are based in the United States. So, welcome, global listeners. And I know Shawnta has the same types of audiences. So, in your upbringing, and this will help us get to know a little bit about you, let's go back to around 8 or 9 year old Shawnta. And when Shawnta was 8 or 9, if we were going to be invited to eat dinner with you at the dinner table, although we didn't really have people over for dinner, so maybe that wasn't a thing, but if that was, what would we be eating if it was your favorite meal at that age? And why was that your favorite meal? So talk to us about what you would have been eating at that age and said, this is my favorite meal right now, and why.
At that time, and actually it's still my favorite meal, but I cook it differently now. But at that time, it
Okay.
was corned beef and cabbage, was my favorite meal. And the reason I liked it so much, I thought the cabbage tasted so good with the corned beef. When I became an adult and got married, I learned that my mom really didn't know how to cook vegetables very well at all. And so the reason I really thought corned beef and cabbage tasted so good, it was the flavor from the meat. Because if you ever buy corned beef from the store, it normally comes with a seasoning pack. So what I was really liking was it was a seasoned and well seasoned, the most well seasoned vegetable that I was being served in my childhood. When I
Okay.
got older, I actually learned that you don't just boil cabbage until it like falls apart. There's a process to that. So now I make cabbage multiple different ways. It's much better, and it still has a little bit of crispiness to it. And I actually know how to season the cabbage individually. So that's why that was my favorite meal, because all the other vegetables from my childhood mostly were bland. They
Yeah.
just tasted like water, but I still like to eat vegetables, even though they didn't taste that great. So yeah, that would be my favorite meal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that to kick us off. So next question, you might already have this, but I don't know. I don't think no, I've walked out to a song before, but you also do some speaking. We both do some speaking at conferences and across different stages and stuff. So if you had to choose a theme song right now to walk out to, what would be one of your go-to theme songs? And tell us about that.
Well, this is it really depends on my mood, but
Yeah.
I was asked a similar question recently, so I'm gonna go with what I said then. It's What's Up Danger. I can't actually tell you who sings this song, but I'm gonna tell you where the song is from. So, my sons are really into comic books and all that stuff. And
Yep.
so we went to go see wait a minute. Is it Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse? I don't know. The very first Miles Morales movie, the first
Okay.
one. Now, I can't remember if that was Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse. I'm sorry, people. I just don't know. But that very
Tell
first
us in
one,
the comments. Tell us. Educate us. We don't know.
all right. But that very first one, that's where Miles Morales is really trying to figure out who he is as a human being and if he can be a Spider-Man. Because what you learn from this Spider-Verse, there's multiple Spider people. And I want to say, well, the one was a Spider pig. So there's multiple Spider humans, whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a point where he's talking to like Peter Parker Spider-Man, And he's like,
Mhm.
Miles, you just have to take a leap of faith. And so as they go
Mhm.
in the traditional canon, he has a whole moment with himself. And there's a part where he leaps off of a building. And why this is significant is because up until this point, he has been struggling to like understand his powers, jump and do it. And so finally, he's just like, F it, I'm just going to jump. And
Yep.
when you listen to the song What's Some Danger, that's the song that's playing when he decides to take that leap of faith. And when you listen to the
Oh,
lyrics, it's essentially talking about taking risks and saying like to danger, because taking a risk is dangerous because you don't know what the outcome is. It wouldn't be a risk if you knew that. It's essentially like standing in the face of danger and saying, regardless of how the outcome is going to be, I have just, it may be just a mustard seed of faith in myself that this
yep,
could work out. So I'm
yep.
going to leap off of this building. So I would say that is kind of my walk up song. And that I do make playlists on Pandora. Apparently, that means I'm old because I'm still using Pandora. But anyway, on my playlist, my party playlist, that is the first song that I hear when I turn on that playlist. Is that song? So that is
Okay.
my answer.
Yes, we got it. Okay. Wow, that's a very symbolic. Sorry, you all. I have a hair hanging down like a rant. Got it. Yes. Um uh it's a significant song. It's symbolic, and it's interesting whenever I ask people this question, either on the podcast here or just in life, everybody has different reasons, and none of them seems to be like, it's just, again, I like these types of questions and I like modeling this for people because sometimes I hear with groups, they're like, well, I wouldn't even know how to start a conversation with so and so for whatever reason, right? There could be multiple things happening when maybe any of us as a human feels like uncomfortable approaching someone. But sometimes it's these simplest questions that tell us a lot about who a person is. And their favorite song is one of those things. It doesn't mean you have to judge people's responses when you ask them questions. It just lets you know more about who they are, how they think, how they operate, maybe a little bit how they believe, how they see themselves. Okay, so on that same vein, I know that you are a lover of literature. What's like a fun book you're reading right now that's on your bookshelf? And more of like a professional or academic leaning book. I know we both kind of dabble in multiple texts all at once. I call it microdosing books. But like I'll read a chapter of one and let it absorb and soak in, right? Like I don't necessarily always sit and read a whole book. Sometimes I do. But what are a couple that come top of mind that you're like, this is one I'm exploring right now, and one that's more fun or maybe fiction, and one that is a little bit more heavier, like academic or spiritual leaning, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yes, now I feel like I should have grabbed all of my those books and had them right here so I could
Oh,
just
I've
rattle
done it.
them all easier. But before I answer that question, I wanted to share my favorite lyrics from that song, What's Up Danger? There's a
Oh,
part of it where it says, because I like high chances that I might lose. I like it all on the edge, just like you. I like tall buildings so I can leap off of them. I go hard with it no matter how dark it is. And so I
yeah.
like those lines because it's
Right.
like no matter what happens, because if you
Yeah.
take a risk and you leap off a building or you leap into something, it might get really hard. And there's something about me, I have a drive that I can't explain that I'm like, no matter how dark it is, I'm gonna go hard. So with all that being said, let's talk about books.
Yes.
So I just finished watching a series on Hulu called Normal People, and I just came across it doom scrolling. Now, of course, I start the first episode and then I see, oh, it's based on this book. So I'm like, if this series is good, I'm going to go back and read the book. Now, first of all, I have to give like a warning because if you follow me in my book reviews, I give people a warning. If you go and watch frontal male nudity, so if you cannot handle seeing that, don't go there. I have warned you. With that being said, it wasn't, in my opinion, gratuitous. It wasn't, in my opinion, pornographic. It made sense for the plot. So I just actually finished reading the book and listening to the audio book because I'm a big audiophile and I love to listen. And I will say that the audio book is on point because some people y'all don't need to be reading books because you dry. But this book is really good. So this book follows two people, Connell and Marianne. They
Okay.
go to high school together, and what happens is every few months the book jumps up in time, and you're seeing how these two people's lives continue to intersect. And essentially, had they not been intersected, you can see how her life is influencing his decisions, his life is kind of influencing her decisions together. And what I love about it, and also this is the thing for me. If your book has a title, I kind of low key listen to like if your title drops in the book. And so I'm like, oh, you did it. So there's a part where they're essentially questioning, like, what is normal? Am I normal? Because when the book starts off, you got Mary Ann, who is rich, because Connell's mom cleans her mother's house. And she is just a hated human at school to be liked, but she's really, really smart. And then you have Connell, who is he is really, really smart, but he's a jock. And so he's just popular by default, but he's really introverted. And the two of them, because he would come after school to pick his mama for his house. Long story short, they get a little connected together. I'm not going to
Mhm.
spoil the whole plot. But then they end up going off to college. They end up reconnecting again. And then she goes off abroad. They connect again. And so you kind of get these two humans trying to figure out what is it like to be human? What is it like to be connected with somebody? What
Mhm.
does this mean to like sacrifice, not sacrifice? What should we take from other people? Because there's other people in their circle who are problematic. How
Okay.
much should we take for other people? What? So it was a lot of human questions. So I like that book because it really gets into who we are as humans.
Mhm.
And I will give the author a credit. The side characters were well built. Because sometimes you got
Okay.
side characters. I'm like, I don't even care about you. Like, why are you
Right.
story? You are pointless. And the other thing I will say, the book and the Hulu series match up.
Okay.
They really stuck to the source material. I think the only difference there was they mentioned there's a part in the book where it mentions Connell's grandmother. That isn't included in the series. But I actually agree that it should be cut because the grandmother's never mentioned again. So I actually thought that was an appropriate choice.
Okay.
I highly recommend reading, either watching the series first or watching the book. But it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then when it comes to Kid World, because I read all types of books, I've been reading through the Library of Doom series. So this book would probably go to early readers of chapter books, so like grades 1 and 2. And if you have a kindergarten that can read really well, they will like it. This is a series I brought for my boys when they were younger that
Okay.
I just never really read for reading through this series. But the whole thing is there's this secret library of doom, and there's these dangerous books. And sometimes it's what's in the book, sometimes it's what the book can do. And this librarian has to go and collect these dangerous books. So like one book was trying to take over the world and wrap itself around the globe. Another book, if you picked it up, you ended up inside of it and stuck to the pages. So the library had to come and rescue them. So
No
very quick,
wonder your sons loved it.
yeah. So
It sounds
it was just
awesome.
very a very very cool series there. And then let me think what else I just read with the book a group of doulas killing the black body.
Hmm.
Book is about 20 years old. But I read this book with this group of doulas. They are all black women, and essentially about the history of policing, like the reproduction and like the sexuality of black women.
Yep.
And it covers everything from birth control, from like the mammy narrative,
Yep.
uh, from perception that black women all we want to do is be sexual and have sex, to the fact of that all y'all want to do is have kids and now you want to police how much you have kids, to
Mm.
how the church was used to kind of sell birth control to get black women to use birth control, also knowing that some of the there's some dangers and side effects. So Yeah.
Many,
That book
many.
was
Well, I'll offer this little caveat because we both are kind of history buffs in our own way in different areas. So one of the things I found throughout deconstruction of and decolonization of my faith and my faith walk through the years as an adult, after growing up in a very conservative church environment, my mother's side of the family is still very heavily Mennonite Amish. Um, so I didn't grow up Mennonite or Amish, but I was definitely around it all the time and have relatives there. So, and I know about it. Um, but one of the things that I've realized in when you have to dig deep, right? You have to want to know. That's my whole play, and actually why I changed the name of this podcast about a year ago for us to really even understand and connect more deeply in cultural ways across culture and across cultural stories, we do have to be willing to really go to those depths within ourselves first. Because we will only then be limited to how much we've done the work within ourselves of knowing ourselves and loving ourselves. And part of that is accepting all of it, right? Accepting, like, hey, I was programmed to think this way, and that's not actually what I believe. That's not actually what I think about the world. That's really hard work. So I also want to name that today. If you're watching and you're like, I don't even know half the stuff they're talking about. And how don't I know that? That's oh, stop yourself right there because that's not going to help you to do this little shame spiral and go, well, Shantae said this, and oh, next time I see her in a PD and she's going to think this of me. And no, that's not what's being said. What's being said is there are so many different layers. And specifically in United States context, this will segue us a bit and we won't stay on this soapbox too long, but specifically in United States context, we are all very, very responsible. And it's been more glaring than ever in this era of history, I believe, more glaring than ever that not only do we have the autonomy and tools to research and actually dig for the correct information about who each of us are, in multitudes of ways, whether that is psychology models about personality, whether that is ethnic groups and ways that we can look at our DNA and blah, 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 whatever your thoughts are on any of it, we have access to knowledge and information like we never had before in humanity. And it's collected over the times. So it's our duty for each of us to peel back those layers of what we do and don't know about ourselves first, to then be open to understanding other people. So, all that to say, the United States in particular has a history that was literally defined and built on keeping those layers out of every American's purview. No matter what color your skin is, no matter what, it was very much defined down to, well, we want freedom for all, but we don't really mean that when we put it down. We meant it this way and just for this group. So you see that pattern over time. So the one thing I wanted to name that kind of pinged me and having that now this knowledge of deconstructing some things within myself, some things that I always disagreed with about birth control, have had my own very, very major issues actually health-wise a few times that I tried it throughout my adult life. Mm-mm. Um, but in
and
the
I
yeah, sorry.
And I will add the full title of the book is Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty. And that's by Dorothy Roberts. And I will say it is a dense read. So a lot of the stuff that Justine is talking about, she goes over court cases and
Yep.
law. So there's a lot of stuff. Like most of the time when I read a book, I'm good on the vocab. No, I had the book with my
Okay.
dictionary because I literally
Thank
had to
you.
read. And then I got one more book that kind of goes on the line, and this will be my last book because I could talk to y'all about books. This whole podcast could be nothing but me talking to you about books that y'all need
Oh,
to
I
read.
know. They're in for it with us because we have to limit ourselves. But before you say the last book, I just wanted
Okay.
to note this with that intersect because I do know, especially who our listeners are in the US, where they're geographically typically based, and it goes back to where you and I have been based, which is the Midwest. So understand that even just one caveat that I discovered was, and you're talking about reproduction and birth control, specifically those matters. When you look into the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a very specific alignment, and many people don't realize this. The Southern Baptist Church The conservative Southern Baptist Church specifically aligned themselves with the Democratic National Convention because it was actually advantageous for them to promote birth control. So, like, there's those people, and you kind of spoke to that in how it specifically affected the Black community and was weaponized against Black women. But I wanted to also name that because often you have resistance. And what I was taught growing up and even saw and have heard family members say, they have no idea that the Southern Baptist Church function, they're a political machine right alongside the government in the United States. They flip-flop all the time with whatever is going to be advantageous for them monetarily to advance whatever agenda they have. So I just want to name that because that is very, very shrouded in lots of worship and lots of preaching in the church, and many, many pastors don't even know that. Hard stop. Okay, sorry. Your next book.
So my last book that I read, and I finished reading this book a couple of months ago, and it's called Refusing Compulsory Sexuality, colon,
Oh, okay.
Black Asexual Lens on Our Sex-Obsessed Culture. And this was written by Shawnta J. Brown. Now, even though she does go into research, hers, in my opinion, and this is no shade to Dorothy, our last author, hers is easily to read and understand. I thought it was explained for the everyday reader. Now, here's what's interesting. When I came across this book, I kind of just wanted to know more about people who identify as being on the asexuality spectrum. That's the reason I read this book. But when I was looking at the main title is Refusing Compulsory Sexuality. I had no clue what I was getting myself into. Sharonda, she pushed back hard about some of the things that are norms in our societies, about how we are pushing people. If you once you get a certain age, if you have not lost your virginity, like there's something wrong with you. And
Uh-huh.
why is that a thing that is in our society that's being pushed? Why is being partnered something that's being pushed? And then she goes into the economy, how getting married and having kids is tied to the economy, and
Yeah,
when it's not
same thing.
happening, like all of these things are connected. And so I was sitting here like, oh my goodness, how and then even how things are labeled and how people get diagnosed with stuff is important, and even how medicine like is more important for men not to deal with erectile dysfunction versus women not, because you're not really there to be pleased, you're just there.
Right, right.
So this going into all of those things. But what I loved about her book, you learn a lot about asexuality, what that is and how it's defined, and it is
Okay.
a spectrum. And
Okay.
then you also learn about why people who identify that way, life is difficult because of all of these norms in society that's actually not beneficial for anyone, regardless of where they are. I just liked how she looked at it from like religion, upbringing, the economy, politics. And then she went back into history. She talked about different countries. So you got a whole
Mm,
entire timeline, and it was easy to understand. I can do high level texts that are dense, but like sometimes I just want to learn information. I don't need to be sitting there cradling the
right,
dictionary while I'm reading
right,
it.
right.
So now those are my book recommendations
Woo,
for now.
thank you. Those are all, wow, just loaded, loaded, loaded topics, but also so urgent. And again, for all of even the books that Shantae recommended, or you hear my other guests recommend, or I recommend across the podcast episodes, you have to, again, take the initiative to start with an area that interests you. These are things that interest us. We've talked probably just you and I about a lot of these topics already, just personally, but I think when you start to really look at who you are as a person, period, and we each do this as humans, you start to go, oh, there's so many layers. Yeah. So start loving it because otherwise it will feel really arduous, or it will feel like, oh, I'm just gonna be wherever I am now. I'm never gonna change and I'm just gonna stop. Well, the opposite of evolution is one thing, extinction. So don't sit on your own hands. That's my charge to listeners as we continue in this year of our Lord 2025 is we have more access in a lot of ways and more connection to more information than we've ever had. And while that also has its downfalls, none of us really have an excuse of like, well, I don't have a car or a library card. Well, if you have a phone. Now, that could be a legitimate excuse, and that goes by the wayside. I still think there's a lot of major issues, specifically in the United States, with reliable Wi-Fi. And now, United States people might watch this and find that laughable, but once again, look outside of the States and look at how we rank. Look at the list of how we rank with all the countries worldwide in every single category: healthcare, technology, Wi-Fi, etc. We just go look. Okay, I'll let you do your own homework. Okay, back to this. So, Dr. Barnes, Dr. Shawnta Barnes, you have been a professor, an author, you have a publishing house, you have a consulting firm. One of the things I actually want to segue into, and we're going to just talk a little bit about briefly because it's at the forefront. We were just notified yesterday in the States about Department of Education. And again, because we're both background teachers and administrators, we both work in schools. We even collaborate on some of our consulting projects together. Any thoughts that you want to share from your unique lived experiences and perspective, being a professor to new teachers, overseeing student teachers? Like, you're very much in the trenches with teachers and principals. Where are you at? And just what would you offer as, like, I just gave a bit of a charge, like, hey, go out there and start love learning you. Like, focus on you, okay? Quit comparing yourself to people. Focus on yourself. What would you give a charge with your vast experiences? You've written nationally for many different education columns. You're part of Any Kids Winning. I think did you found that? There's
No,
so many
I
things
didn't.
you've done. I
I
know.
did not. But so
Well,
I've been around
yeah.
for a while, but I would say, kind of to your point, focus on yourself. And I know that kind of sounds selfish right now, but I also mentor a lot of people, and I get mentees all type of way. People recommend me as a mentor to people, or people literally seek me out.
Yeah.
One of the number one thing that happens to me after conferences is someone asks, "Will you mentor me?"
Yeah.
And I'm cool with that. And I do mentoring and coaching, so it just depends on what makes sense for my life. But when I'm working with student teachers, a lot of teachers are stressed out. And I mean, I've spent a lot of time from my life just listening to people bawl.
Thanks.
And you got the situation with the US federal government. And even before the president was elected, there was this conversation about eliminating the United States Department of Education.
What?
And so when I heard about, the job reductions, people from the US DOE being told not to come into work today, because I know this will air later, but it's
I'm thinking the day after this happened.
yeah, like this is happening for us right now. I didn't have an immediate reaction to it because they said they were going to do this, and they are doing it. And that doesn't mean that I think is okay. I'm just saying I'm choosing to manage my energy. I can't keep getting enraged and losing so much energy over things that we know will happen. And so I go back into that's not taking care of myself when I'm burning up all my energy over this. And so a lot of times it's helping people understand, where do we choose to fight? Where do we choose to put pressure? But you can't do nothing if you don't take care of yourself. And it's so simple. Because one of the hardest things I heard, when you're on the first time I took my kids on the airplane, they were 5.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's when I really listened to this direction. They said something like, put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on your child. And as a mom, our instinct is to protect our kids immediately, and that's how teachers are. Our instinct are to protect our babies, to protect our students, but we can do nothing for those students if we don't put the mask on ourselves first. And so my first step to everybody, before you decide to get involved in any type of activism, advocacy work, are you taking care of yourself? Are you eating properly? Are you moving your body? Are you staying hydrated? Are you feeding yourself some joy? because we have to limit the amount of time we're consuming the news. Now,
Yeah.
my father was a
Yeah.
person, he watched everything. So, I mean, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, C-SPAN, he watched it all because he said everybody's biased. That's something he told me as a kid that
Yep.
stuck to me to this day. He said, if you want to sort of get a whole picture, he said, you'll never get the whole picture. But if you sort of want to get most of the picture, you have to tune into everything because each person is going to choose to include something or choose to leave out something. So after you take whatever time, and I would say limit that time that you have tuned into the news, and then you debrief. So what my husband and I have been doing, we take about 30 minutes where we try to tune into what's happening. Then when we come home, we take 30 minutes to talk about what happened, and then we're done. No more news. And then we talk about joyous stuff. And that could be as silly as, so we have twins, so we love watching videos online of multiples. We
Yeah.
find like, cause like we get it. So
Yeah.
like little twin babies talking to each other. So we look at
Uh-huh.
that type of stuff. Or I just listen to music and dance around. Or now it's getting warm, so I'm outside in my garden ideating. Because if I'm not feeding my brain, if all I'm feeding my brain is the country is falling apart, people are losing their jobs, people are being deported, it's not safe. They're getting my personal information. That is going to stress your whole body out, and you're going to age. And like, I would like my melanin to stay intact for as long as possible, so I cannot be impacting that with my brain being stressed. And I know that probably sounded vain, but I do want to look good. That's important to
It
me.
sounds
So
big at all. I think that again, to even what I was saying earlier, when you start peeling back the layers, and that's what each of our lives are, they're like an onion. Just look at an onion sometime. It's amazing how many layers in one root vegetable. It's a root vegetable, right? I was trying to email myself this image that's on my phone. Look, don't make fun of me if you all watch this because you're gonna say, probably someone is gonna say, well, you could just airdrop it. I know, but I'm on the lap. Never mind. But I'll pull it up later. So if you all see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. I want to segue into the next. I also wanted to give a shout out to you too, and just the diversity of some of your publications so far. So if you all don't know, I want to give you your flowers with this. I always like to give a guest flowers at some point in our interviews, and your flowers are that I was very impressed by your haiku poetry book. And that's a very specific compliment, but it's a genre, especially if you don't know Shawnta personally and you just know her as Educator Barnes and what she might write about or talk about. It's a very different, multifaceted. And I think you and I have shared this in common, and it's probably true for most humans. Anybody could probably relate to what I'm about to say at some level in your world that you live in. Okay. It is this feeling of you, like us specifically, our thing. I know we both create a lot and we can process a lot of information. So what happens though sometimes is we forget to maybe share about all those things, or we just choose not to in different circles because, oh, we have this for this specific brand that we run or this partnership we have. And sometimes then family or friends feel like they can't keep up. And but we're also both entrepreneurs full time. So I put that out there as a caveat because maybe that part you can't relate to. With us in particular, what can happen is even when people go, oh yeah, Shawnta, is she the one who has a publishing company? Well, that's something she does, right? So that can happen when people have read your work or if they know you to be more heavily in education, they might be surprised to find that your book is a bestseller and it's a bestseller in Germany. That's accurate, yeah? It's doing well. It's doing very well in Germany. Is that accurate?
yeah, it's doing it, and it was surprising to me when I get the one thing I hate, and when you write for people, one of the how they get paid is a lot of the time through views and clicks. And so they would tell me like, "Oh, this is how this is going," and I always hated that because I never wanted to know. And this is why I never wanted to know. I write what I feel I want to write. I don't want to write for the algorithm or for likes and clicks because I
Right.
feel the moment I start
Yep.
writing for
Same.
likes and clicks, it becomes inauthentic.
Yep.
So anyway, I still had to say, when I did see that my book was selling decently in Germany, I was like, what the heck? Um, that's just weird. But that's cool. Also to know, I'm like, all right. But also you have to think to yourself, like, in America, we are okay with being monolingual. And lots of places around the world, people are at least bilingual. So
Yeah,
of course,
minimum.
there are people reading my book in English in different places. I just didn't realize that. And I also read a lot of different types of things. So that's also what is surprising to people, because I tell people the first thing I was writing on the internet for public view was about gardening. I was not writing about education. I was telling you how to grow Brussels sprouts and how not to overcook them. I was telling you how to grow mint, and I'm still now I have moved more to the video space. But I wrote poetry for years before that. It's just now becoming more public facing. Unless you know me from college days, then I was writing all types of stuff. If you know that, you are blessed, because you know a different side of me and some things that I was saying. Just picture it, 2005, Hurricane Katrina has happened. Let's just say there's
Yeah.
lots of stuff I was writing about at that time. Uh,
Sheesh. Unbelievable. Well, and that's why I wanted to highlight that specifically, not only to give you some kudos and flowers, because that is the other thing too. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we do and put out. There's a lot of stuff that we do behind the scenes that people will never know about, and they don't need to. And we're not trying to be out there telling everybody everything. But I found that interesting, but I also enjoy the way how you write in the book. It's a book of haikus. And it's very, very well done. And I know it was a labor of love on your part. So I
oh, and the last thing I have to say about my book, my son did the illustrations. And
Yes,
not as
I
like
like
the
that too. Yeah, that was like
um
it felt like, oh, I loved it type of
and
thing.
he's doing really well with his art. He was just in a art show. His school district has artistically talented. You have to try out to get into it, and the district wide art show happened last week. I feel like
Okay.
was you have kids. There's so many daggone events you can't remember what event happened when. But yeah, so and I told him I waited. I said you cannot illustrate something for our company until you get your skills up. And this is even, and I said this to him
Yeah.
even after him being named when he was in sixth grade the best artist
Mhm.
by his peers, by the in the school. I said you
To
got to
know
get
as
to
a
this.
publisher what was
Yeah,
going to be acceptable and that you weren't going to bend
yeah.
for
And
yeah.
I always say that, like, even if your family members, they gotta come with their A game. So if you're gonna work with family, doesn't matter if they're your child. If it's not your A game, you gotta stay in the wings and wait until you get your game up. And that's just how I raise my personal children. So,
I'll
but
never, well, I have to say this really quick and a shout out to my sister Kara. She has a book that is going to be published by Brave Brothers Books, your publishing company. But my sister Kara, who also worked and did a lot of great work with my consulting firm, Educator Aid, for almost 3 years. And then I've connected her and Shawnta on some stuff. And I know you and your sister work closely too, one of your sisters. So but it's funny, but she has this story, my oldest nephew, when he was younger. And this is just if you all know my sister, you probably know this is her personality and she's a straight shooter. But she I will never forget one of my nephews. So my oldest nephew, he made her a bracelet or something when she for her birthday or something, and he asked, "Oh, isn't it so beautiful? Don't you just love the design?" Well, my sister, it makes jewelry too, right? So she told him the truth and she said, "But it's just not for me and it's not the greatest quality, but I'm so happy you made it for me." So, and it was something to that effect, but it was like it's so funny and he's actually a really really great gifted artist and musician. So, and he's almost 18 now, but I that story always makes me laugh because she was just so matter of fact about it. And I know there's so many parents that would hear that or even overhear that and think, oh, that's so mean. No, she wouldn't have bought that. And that's what she told him, basically.
also it
Funny to
sets
know.
children up for success, because when
Right.
we coddle kids, and I'm not saying be mean to children, but when
Hmm.
we coddle kids and give them a
No.
whole bunch of participation awards, they don't
Yeah.
have a real sense of reality about what their skills are. And so I would rather you hear it from me that your skills are where they need to be so you can get your skills up, instead of hearing it from somebody in the world who is going to be mean
Then
and
they're
going to be,
shocked. They're
yeah,
shocked when
and
they go
and
into
then
the
they're
real world.
shocked.
Right. And that's not okay either because you went then your whole life thinking you were this like amazing thing at this thing, and that just isn't true. So to go with that, this was the image I was trying to find. One of my colleagues has posted this, and you could see it's from at the Brain Coach on Instagram. So if you're an educator in K-12 or you work in K-12 adjacent things, perhaps social services, etc., you're probably aware of Abraham Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This was readapted by Nawal Mustafa, who is at the Brain Coach on Instagram, as you see. What I found to be great about this, and it has to go with what you were saying earlier about just not being overly stressed. And I'm segueing into a question I'm going to ask you. But what stands out to you about this? When I saw it, I was like, I love this because it breaks it into what I'm seeing so many adults. Not now, I'm not just talking about K-12 educators. Um, just in general, all of us, that unless we have gone for higher ed degrees, and because people are also overwhelmed with the amount of memes and just pseudoscience stuff that exists on the internet and not knowing what to believe, this is the actual like pyramid of it. But then he's saying, okay, but what does that actually mean? Because for most of us, again, to your point about using a dictionary, if you don't understand words in a book when we're reading, it's the same thing. A lot of times we might see him go, yeah, that's good. Yeah, yeah, this psychologist said it. That's good. Okay, but in your day to day, how do you actually take action? And I think so many of us struggle with identifying where to even begin with that. So when you see this, what resonates with you, or what would you push back on, just in general, again, because we have talked a little bit both about that importance of it can be information overload right now.
So I know that some people have beef with Maslow, and I'm not here to talk about that. So I'm talking
Yeah,
about
same.
what's on the
Yeah,
screen.
same.
So what
Yeah.
I find about this interesting, if you look at the safety band, so that's the second from the bottom, I feel like a lot of people right now are stuck in safety. That's all they're focusing on.
Mhm.
Their career stability, which I understand because that's your livelihood. And so a lot of times when you feel like people are acting out of character, it's
Yeah.
a lot of times because their livelihood is threatened and they feel like I'm not
Yeah,
gonna have a roof over their head. And
absolutely.
in America, we are very kind of go off and make your own family and be over there. Unlike people for other countries where it's multi-generational, where you feel like if I fail, okay, I can go to my uncle or my aunt. Sometimes people don't feel that way. So they feel like they are there for themselves. But what's interesting is the thing that people put last, which should be first, is that physiological piece. And that's the thing that everyone's putting at the bottom. And so I see people stuck in safety or like the self-actualization. So there's a lot of people, I'm just gonna check out. I'm just gonna follow my passion and follow my dreams. And I'm just so it's either like I'm gonna be in this little shell. I gotta keep my head down, be a worker bee, or I'm just like, forget life. I'm gonna do whatever. And I'm like, no, no, no. You're out of balance. The first thing you need to do is actually take care of yourself because when sometimes in the safety one, when people try to create boundaries, they do it in a really piss poor way. And so that's because they was hangry. Maybe you have some food in your belly. You may not have try to
Mhm.
set that boundary in such a nasty way.
Yes. Or if you were prioritizing sleep, you would have known better than to accept a desperate job offer. And now it's in fact impacting your career stability, quote unquote. I think what you named is a very American problem, so to speak, because the absolute value in container environment that we live in from the time you are born in America is that your identity is proud to be an American, and it's capitalism. And the bottom line, our entire education system it relates to whatever the needs of Department of Labor and Workforce are, and or have been, as well as military. That is how our country was designed. I'm not here to comment today if that's good or bad, ugly or beautiful. I am here to lay that out because it is a reality of the structure of America. And when you do that and you push, even right now, the things that you see of all the words that are being banned in an executive order from the United States government, it's because they are clawing on to, oh, wait, y'all are figuring out that we were just trying to do away with all of your identities that are so near and dear to providing that safety and that rest and that connecting with your own body, and it's okay, and you don't need outside help because you need to know your body better than a pharmaceutical company or a doctor. Oh wait, they're figuring it out. Let's not have too much questioning and empathy and SEL and social justice work in schools. We made those millennials and Gen Zers know too much by pushing institutions in college too. Ooh, backtrack. That's what's happening. So again, be aware of what's happening. Don't let it ruin your entire day and energy, but also be honest about it. And that is the hardest thing I think any American, any American is to undo the constant brainwashing we experience growing up in our country. And that's on each of us, each of us individually first. Again, to your point earlier, before we're going out, not that it's not powerful, but before we're going out and only marching in a protest and then not spending time to reflect and even just hydrate ourselves, for example, as human beings. So I want to show that graphic and then ask this question before we wrap up. And I want to specifically ask about your upcoming book club as well as some of your gardening work. So we've gotten to talk about some of it today, but I don't know if people realize the extent that you've had a lot of not only content around gardening, expertise, but now you are also doing some consulting work where you're having crossover with gardening and working with schools, working across the city of Indianapolis with organizations, et cetera, on some different things. Let's do that first. I'll close with the other question because it has to do with what advice you would give when you think back to when you had turned 30, but now you're 41. I think 43.
Yes.
So we're gonna talk more like millennial Gen Z stuff to close out and like what advice we would give ourselves because I just turned 40. We're both Virgos, you all, so our birthdays are close. But let's close with that one. And let's hear about your gardening because I'm passionate about growing just stuff and I learn a lot from you. And this
All right.
is
So the
your
first thing I'll
upcoming.
tell you all about is my upcoming book club. So I do 4 book clubs a season, and these are the book clubs that Blazing Brilliance produces year round. But we also do book clubs for organizations, so books
Nice.
that they need someone to come in and facilitate. And side note, we don't just read books to pat ourselves on the back. If you ever do a book club with me in your organization, you will actually have tangible goals met because you read the book that will
Yep.
influence and change some of the systems in your organization. With that being said, this for our Poetic Perspective Spring Book Club, we're reading 3 books. We're reading Joy is the Justice We Give Ourselves. And I want to shout out Natalie Pickin, who is behind Black World Schoolers. I got to read a advanced copy of this book because I was able to
Okay.
get one for her before the book was like, ready for public facing. And I love this so much. I'm like, we have to read this. And then we're going to read Moth. And then last, we'll do For Everyone by Jason Reynolds. This book club happens on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And how this book club works, you can join us on Zoom for an hour. Or if you're like, Shantae, I
Okay.
don't got time for that. There's also a WhatsApp community. So if you just want to have
Nice.
someone that you can just talk to for here and there, you do that. And some people ask, well, why is there a fee with your book club? A lot of people that participate in my book clubs are educators or they work in education adjacent organizations. And I always provide a guide that you get to take to learn more either about the author, more about some of the issues that are covered in the books. And I also give you things that you can use to go back into the classroom. So if
Yeah.
you're like an English teacher or you teach reading, you can literally take my guide. You get a license to use it and you can go take it into your classroom. So that's so when people ask me that is why. And then also, it takes me a lot of time. So some people will tell you some of my guides are like 20, 30 pages long. So it takes a lot of time depending on what type of book we're reading, especially when we do our culture books and we read a lot of history. It takes a lot of time to put all that information together. So that's that.
So in other
Um,
words, if I'm a person who is interested in checking this out, I should visit blazingbrilliance.com, and we'll link this
yep.
exact page in the show notes and stuff so you all can have her website. But but I should expect too, this is not something that is just a, oh well, if you want. I mean, now that's on you as a consumer. If you sign up for it and you just decide you can't commit, obviously, but don't go into it thinking that this is like a beginner quote unquote book club. It's
I,
not that. It's not necessarily light touches. I would call it a book club of depth. And for serious people who want to explore their own beliefs, thought patterns, and views, that it's challenging, perhaps.
yeah. And we do different types of book club. Our spring book club is always poetry. Our summer book club is women only. We do
Okay.
romance and self-help. Our fall book,
Oh, see, I didn't know
yeah.
that. I didn't know that.
Our And then I do that club with my sister. Our fall book club is
Nice.
silent stories. It's not banned books because we do silent stories because we talk about before we got into this banned book conversation, there were books that were never put on the shelf to begin with.
That's
So we
right.
read books and then our very first club, our winter book club, is for the culture, where we get into some books about different cultures. And those are the ones where I really have my big, heavier guys because we get into a lot of historical stuff. So if you want to check this out, go to blazingbrilliance.com. And also, I get a lot of introverts in this book club. And the reason I say that, I have some people that sign up for my book club, they'll get into the WhatsApp community and they don't ever say anything. But then when the book club is over, they really enjoy themselves. So some people, this is their first step to socializing. So we
Yeah.
have all types of people, that participate. So the
I'm
other thing
so
I was
glad
telling
you said that, Shantae, because that's a very, very real thing. And there's been things I haven't joined because not obviously I'm not a shy person in most situations,
right?
but in most, we're all shy in different situations, like for different reasons, but to be on camera and stuff. But for me, because I am on camera a lot, or I'm talking a lot, or traveling, yeah, that sounds exhausting to have to show up and engage in something else. So there's something similarly. That's just good for people to know, whether it's because you just want to ease into things, you're a thought processor, whatever. That was very helpful to know because I know for many people, it's like a very fearful thing of like, oh, the last thing I want to do is show up on another video call. And just an exhausting sounding thing for whatever reason. So thank you for
And
saying
I will say many of my book club people also are cat people. So it's normally people with their cats. So a lot of people bring their cats or they'll bring their favorite cup or whatever, because
that.
you have
Uh-huh.
them in your house. So wherever you got in your cup is your business.
Mm-hmm.
So they have their little cup, they have their little cat or their dog. So we are very animal friendly as well. So if you need your comfort item or your comfort animal, we welcome animals and humans all alike.
Awesome. Now let's hear about Gardner Shakol
So
and
Gardner Shakole is like my baby. Shakole, so that's Shicole, is my middle name. Many of my family members call me by that name instead of my first name. And when I was younger and people saw I was like getting into gardening, people were like, well, Shawnta, how you do that? How you do this? How you do that? And so I started like explaining to people one off. And then I'm like, I don't got time for that. So I'm like, I'm going to make a website and I'm just going to start telling you what I'm doing. I mean, you can see here, my kids are very small. So they've been outside doing gardening stuff with me since they started walking. So they've been down for the par. But my website, gardenershakole.com, you can see all our past gardens all the way back to 2009.
wow.
So when I
This
tell
is a
you,
genuine reaction, you all, because I have not looked this in depth at her website. Wait, we
so
have to give more flowers to you.
so when I say
So
we are about
amazing.
this life, I mean we
Wow.
are in
She
here
doesn't
deep
just talk the talk.
about this life. But I've been gardening with my dad since about third grade. And then my
Wow.
dad's uncle, who's my grand uncle, he had a huge garden on the south side and he had a barber shop. So picture
Oh,
this.
yeah,
South side
everybody.
Indianapolis, you're going there, you're getting your head all tucked in together, and you go right to the back and pick you some food. And my great uncle Moses, he grew so much food for the purpose of the community coming to get it.
I
So
have a great uncle named Moses. That's weird. Sorry.
but yeah, so
On
that's
the
so
Amish side.
Yeah. So it's gardening and growing food has been so much in our family. And I really believe putting the right stuff into your body
Yeah.
can help keep us together. And our tagline, which I do have trademark, like federally trademark, is anyone can be a gardener. You just have to get ready, get set, and grow. Because
Yeah.
the biggest pushback I get from people when I try to tell them, because if you get me alone, at some point I'm gonna tell you to grow something. Shawnta, I can't. Oh, I got a black thumb. I kill stuff. I guarantee you, if you're listening and you claim you kill stuff, I will find you something that you can
Yep.
keep alive.
Yeah.
And it has been done before. But
Mhm.
we also have a YouTube channel, which you put in Gardner Shacole, and we got a lot of videos. So if you go to my videos here, we have so many different playlists.
Right.
You go to the playlist, you can see all types of videos.
I
And the
need to make
earliest
sure I'm
videos,
subscribed. Y'all go subscribe. She's almost to 500. Then she can start making some little passive money. Okay. Help us out.
it's it's funny. I have videos that have thousands of views. My most popular video is talking about how to grow watermelon and pumpkins vertically instead of horizontally.
See,
That
I
video,
literally need that.
so that video is pretty popular. But if you want to see my boys when they were tiny, they were born in 2011, so I got them out in the garden starting in 2013. So you can see
Mhm.
them grow up. You can see
Yep.
their little voice cracking all the way to their voices like down in the basement
Oh,
now. But we are all there, and I also have to shout out BreeMG.com. BreeMG.com has been following me since last year. So if
okay.
you notice that the video quality and there's like transitions and a thing called B-roll happening now,
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah.
because there's been some professional updates to those videos. So
Oh,
um,
wow. Okay.
yeah, so we
So
up in the game.
ooh, this is, well, I am so impressed by you, friend, more and more through the years. So y'all, we've known each other or known of each other for what? Probably close to a decade. And then we probably met maybe 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, because we were on a committee together. We were on the
Yeah, like we've done a
Indiana
lot of things. I was
department.
thinking about this the other day, but I
Yeah, so
felt a little like we are a little
yeah.
slow to just open up our world to anybody. And there's a lot of reasons why I think most educators are pretty careful about who they associate with, to be honest. I think that's
Well,
normal.
yeah, and like when I first met Justine, it was at a committee meeting because we were on the Indiana Department of Education Cultural Competency Advisory Council, and so we're in this meeting, and I see her, she's saying some things, I'm saying some things. I'm like, okay, and then years later, we are at a mixer event for education, and a person who's a mutual connection between us was like, y'all should meet each other, and I was with my husband, and so I was like, hey. And she was like, weren't you on that committee? I'm like, yeah. And so it was kind of like this awkward kind of like,
Okay,
okay.
wait. I have to tell people the full context. We also clearly, I think I clearly picked up on, I'm gonna hang out with Shantae and Jermaine probably majority of the time I'm here because they seem just as awkwardly placed as I do of not really knowing what's going on at this event. Sometimes that is also a very real thing. And you were just the easiest people to talk to, I think, like at that particular event. But I also, yeah, it's so funny because yes, that committee, even that committee, which is interesting, whole other experience. It just goes to show that sometimes, because I felt a certain way about it. The only reason they had asked me to be on it was they went by my last name, and literally the person at the time who like headed up all of the state level school improvement stuff saw me at a conference. She knew of me and said, "Oh, that's right. You know what? We need some Latinos on this committee." And she didn't bother to ask, right? Like you didn't, you first of all, there's so many things, right? But all things work for good, and all of that to say we've actually known each other for quite a long time and been in each other's orbits, had common colleagues across Indianapolis and the Midwest. So but I say this because this also goes to show you can think that you know someone, but it takes time and there's layers. And that's why it's also so important to know these things about yourself and reflect on them. Because even as we're talking right now, I could tell you five other things that popped into my head from you just sharing your gardener page, and I haven't explored it deeply. I need information there, but furthermore, and I think you know this from me and my sister, but we also have parallels with our families. So yeah, that is funny that we both have a great uncle named Moses, but the reality is just like Shawnta grew up growing things, not in the same ways, but we did too. Like, and our grandparents had a restaurant on one side, and then our great grandparents had gardens and stuff because they were Amish and we were around all that. So we were used to canning and like knowing how to do those things. But there's also, I think there's a huge resurgence right now, partly because of food shortages and inflation and saving money. So I would also say it's very timely that you go connect with Shawnta's channel and this gardening page, but also others like hers, because again, we're living in an age of information and technology. Anybody can truly be a gardener. My expertise has been more in landscape design and stuff because I did that for a number of years and I just love it. I used to work with my dad in the yard. And then I also, since I was young, since I was probably like 4, and then started mowing lawns and getting paid by family members like by the age of 10 because I just wanted to. And I think my parents were like, she really needs something to do. And then I worked my way starting at 15, worked at a golf course, was a greens girl. So I'd had to be at work at 4 a.m. every day in the summer months, and then would go to athletics and stuff. And that's how I paid my way through college, then eventually working for some commercial landscaping companies. Because I knew my first job, I actually worked at this restaurant. If you're from Northern Indiana, shout out. My first job actually at 15 for 2 weeks was at a diner called Alley Oops at Pure Moran Mall in Elkhart. I'm going to clip this. I got to tag my Facebook high school people in this. But my very first job was actually an Alley Oops diner. You had to wear a poodle skirt. And it was at a mall in Elkhart, Indiana, Pure Moran Mall. It no longer exists. I went to church across the street from there, First Baptist Church at Elkhart. Shout out. That's where I went to church growing up, a lot of my growing up. But all that to say, I did that because I grew up being at my grandparents' restaurant, which was right down the street from there. And I thought, oh, that'll be fun. No. If you can imagine like a scene from a movie, like all the waitresses were like crackly, heavy smokers. And that here I am, this 15-year-old. And they're like, and I'm supposed to be the hostess. And the first day on the job, this lady who's probably like 55, she goes, we need some orders. Go make the milkshake. Nobody had showed me. And it's like a scene from a movie. It just went everywhere. And so I said at the 2-week mark, I was like, no, this isn't for me. So that's my story of my actual first job before all the outdoor work and becoming obsessed with nature and stuff. So to close us out, and because we've done some reminiscing down our own memory lanes, and y'all are going to look below and you're going to click on all the links and find all the goodies that Shawnta has for you across her sites. If we think back to when we were 30, so I want you to speak to people who listen. So majority of our listeners are between the ages of like mid 20s to mid 50s. That's majority of our audience as far as generationally. So majority of the Love Learning You audience is ages 25 to 55. We have some outliers too. We do span 5 generations, but that's the majority. So based on that, if you were to look back, I just turned 40, you're 41. We've done a lot in our careers heavy in our 30s, and a lot of shifts and pivots, personal life things. And I think that's normal for most people in their 30s. I want you to think back to that age, knowing what you know now, but speak to the people who are about to turn 30 who might listen to this, or perhaps they're in their early or mid 30s. So these would be our younger millennials, zennials, I think they're called. No. That's on the border, maybe. I don't know. I'm butchering the specifics, but that Gen Z/millennial border is where you're going to fall if you are either getting ready to turn 30 or you're already in your early 30s. What would you say to them as far as advice of like, what do you wish you would have known at that age, turning 30, that you know now and looking back on this decade of your 30s?
Oh, okay. I guess
We're
I guess
we're ending with a loaded advice question.
Yeah, it is a loaded question. I would say, I think what I wish I would have known is that I should have leaned more into um what I wanted to do because it took me so long to decide to actually start my company because there was a lot of fear there because you get told like you need to go to college. Okay, you got college, you got to get a job, and then you need to work up for your retirement. And now you got this paycheck that's coming every other week, regardless of whether you're great or not great. And I'm not saying to not be great because you should try to be great at your job. And
And
so
it
it's
needs
something
to be.
else,
Yeah.
to take that leap of faith. And so I felt like my 30s was this holding period of me wanting
Mhm.
something else, but just not really choosing to lean into it. Like not choosing to like address some problematic people in my life. Not
Yeah. Same.
choosing because you get to a point where it's like, you know what, it's not that deep. And then you find out it really was that deep. It really was that deep.
And
And I
I'm
really,
holding on to it. Why?
yeah,
Yeah.
so like really leaning in to those things and also being okay with making the shift because I think in your 30s, that's where you hear these people like, oh, I think I'm going towards a midlife crisis. It's okay in your 30s if you're like, you know what? I don't want to do what I've been doing the last decade of my life. I want to do something else because you're still young. That is the time you don't want to be in your 60s. Like, oh, and if you are in your 60s and changing, that's still cool. So I'm not saying that's not
Do
cool,
that. Yeah, we're speaking
but
specifically to the this age range, but absolutely you can pivot and change whenever you want. So
right. But I think sometimes we don't pivot and change when we want to pivot and change in our 30s because we have this fear of what may happen, or we've
what
gotten
I
so much,
lose.
yeah, we got so much confirmation and praise. In
Yeah.
my 30s, I got a lot of praise for the accomplishments I had.
Yep.
So it sounded crazy to essentially want to walk away from my success and go try some other things. But my mind, if I could be, and some people refer to me as a workhorse. I used to
Yeah,
like
I've
that.
been called that.
I don't like that
I don't like that at
term
all.
about myself anymore because I was a workhorse all the things that I wanted to do. And so now I'm leaning into doing. So when people are like, "You're doing a lot of things," now it may seem like I'm doing a lot of things, but every single thing are the things I actually want to do. And I say no a lot. And in my 30s, I struggle with saying no. So
Yeah.
in my 20s, I just really didn't say no. In my 30s, I would say no. But then you got these older folks that's like, I'm gonna come back at you. And if you came back at me and circled around, I probably would have switched to a yes because oh, that is just
Right.
easier. I
Right.
can do this thing. But back to that chart that Justine showed, if
Mhm.
I had more sleep and I was more well rested, Shawnta, you didn't have time to agree to do that thing. Like you literally didn't have time. And so
Yeah.
now you're stealing more time from your sleep. You're stealing more time from your spouse. You're stealing more time from your kids to go do this other thing that you really didn't care about. And so when you're caring about the things, I feel like I prioritize my health even more because I care about these other things because I'm like, oh, I get to do this thing. So I think your 30s, you want to lean into I get to do, not I have to do these
Yeah.
things.
And
That would be my
examine.
advice.
Thank you for that. The only thing I would add that popped up for me personally, because so many parallels in our stories and things that we did experience in our 30s, is that you do get to decide, even if it feels like you don't get to. We all have things that we stay attached to, and there's a number of reasons why. I think it's really important. Like when I started examining why I was actually pushing, for example, and I've talked about this with you extensively through the years, why I was still pushing to stay in a PhD program. A lot of it had to do with because that's what my mom wanted for me. And my mom passed away a few years ago. And it's this whole thing, right? Like many of my things had to do with I was still seeking love from my mom. Like, and that I don't feel bad saying that. I don't my dad knows that. Like that's not a it's not a harm when you start to identify these things. Sometimes I've seen people feel bad when they start to identify even in their 30s, like, wait, I did this because actually this is what mom wanted or dad wanted for me. It was their dream. And sometimes we don't realize how much, very much indeed, we are just another rung on the DNA ladders of our ancestors. And I think that that is more than just spiritual, mental, emotional, physical. I think it's just a part of legacy and understanding even then what is our responsibility as an individual soul living a human experience on earth. And if this is my family and this is who I'm born into, then what is my responsibility for not only carrying on the great things of legacy? Because you hear so many people say legacy, legacy, legacy. But also, what are the things that I'm responsible for knowing enough of my own story and my own family history for not repeating? And those patterns, a lot of times in the church, you hear them called generational curses, I like to say patterns because to me, I have a lot of generational patterns that thank God my ancestors had certain gifts and talents and have passed those things into me. So like I think it's important just on all fronts, whether the thing is negative and you feel like this is a pattern that needs to be broken. I don't want more alcoholism in my family. I don't want more addicts in my family. Like whatever that thing is, take charge and know it and understand your own weaknesses and shortcomings and things you need to work on. But also, okay, but what are these beautiful, amazing things? Because any one of us can look at our history, and once you start going into genealogy and your family trees and go, oh my goodness, this is some messed up stuff. And that's everyone. Like, so because humans, we struggle and we are drawn to our own brand of suffering. And misery loves company. And be aware of that full circle in the information technology age when you're scrolling. But thank you for sharing. Um, what platform on social media is your favorite to connect on? LinkedIn, Facebook, no, you're not on TikTok anymore. I know that.
Yeah,
You,
I know some people were
I mean,
disappointed.
I've taken to referring people to my YouTube, to be honest with you, but
Yeah, I'm pretty much. Oh, well, I'm Educator Barnes and Gardner Shacole on most places. So
okay.
Educator Barnes on Instagram, uh, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And then Gardner Shacole, also Educator Barnes is also on YouTube. And then Gardner Shacole on YouTube. There's the website on Instagram. And then Gardner Shacole is now under Blazing Brilliance because I do implement garden education for some education places. So if you want to see Gardner Shacole on LinkedIn, it's there under Blazing Brilliance. So if you go to educatorbarnes.com, you will, that's like my portfolio page. It will connect you to everything.
Perfect.
But I also tell people, if you don't want to, if you just want to hear about food and growing and being outside, follow Gardner Shacole. It's very peaceful over there. If you want to hear about books and all types of stuff about education, follow Educator Barnes. And if you're like, I love you, girl, follow me everywhere. So do all that. But please follow the Gardner Shacole YouTube channel because I had like 50 followers, and then during the pandemic we jumped up to 300 some followers, and a lot of people started following me because they were scared because of the pandemic, and I feel like we're getting back into that again. So I will do my best to try to put out content to help you grow stuff at home.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being a guest on Love Learning You. You've been on my when it was previously named Cultural Capacity, and I know that we get to hang out a lot in different spaces. So I'm grateful to call you friend and also confidant, but I'm also just grateful that anybody who sees or hears or listens to this, hopefully they will take away a nugget that is for them and for their own journey. So let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Be sure that you give a shout out to my guest and thank her in the comments as well. Dr. Shawnta Barnes, Educator Barnes, based out of Indianapolis, Indiana, in the United States, but serving globally through our friend, the internet. And travels. You do travel a lot. We didn't even talk about traveling today. So a whole other thing. Maybe we'll have to have a part two, but many layers to getting to know our beautiful guest. And I hope that each of you feel the same way about yourselves when you look in the mirror every single day. So let's continue to get compassionately curious. And I'll see you next time on Love Learning You. Bye-bye.